Let's move to the SEC. Georgia reasserts itself in the SEC. That was a dominant performance from Georgia at home over Tennessee, 31-17. And it wasn't just that it was 31-17. It was the fact that in the last three quarters of that game, Georgia went on a 31-7 run. It was a dominant performance from Georgia, and in a lot of ways was finally the Georgia that we've all been waiting to see. We saw a little glimpse of this earlier in the year in that second half against Alabama when they staged that incredible comeback. We saw a little bit of this Georgia against Texas, although again, I would repeat, like that game was about short fields for their offense. I thought that this week for Georgia was the first time that you got to see dominant defense and quality, efficient offense all put together into one game. The 31-7 rout after the first quarter was as impressive as Georgia has been all year. And I get it. They've beaten Texas on the road, which we don't see a lot of that in the SEC. We do not see a lot of teams go on the road to these, I would say, upper tier teams and win. Georgia was able to do that, but this game was even a better performance because it was a more holistic performance. It was a more balanced performance. If you've listened to this program, for any length of time, first of all, thank you. I love that you're here, and I appreciate that you're here. And you will have heard me say that I didn't think that Georgia had a Carson Beck issue. That was kind of the narrative swirling around Georgia. I didn't think it was Beck. When I watched the tape, Beck wasn't getting much help at all. Like, for instance, the Ole Miss game. The offensive line played terrible. He's under duress. The wide receivers are dropping passes. So Beck's not getting really any help. And there was all this, people, it was this talking point. Carson Beck. What happened to Carson Beck? Carson Beck's fine. He's fine. And when his team decided to play to his level, they were pretty dominant. So you look up and their offensive line, way better in this game. Way better. No sacks. Only 2 TFLs allowed, and against a really good Tennessee front. We've been singing the praises of the Tennessee front seven for a long time, and rightly so. And Georgia held them at bay. So their offensive line played much better. The wide receivers played way better. I liked the game plan a lot more. They got him on the move. There was things moving. He was accurate. The offense for Georgia finally looked like the offense we've seen over the last couple of years. Remember, coming into this last week, Georgia was 50th in total offense in college football. The last 2 years, they were in the top 5. And what we saw against Tennessee Saturday night was more along the lines of a top 5 offense than a 50th offense. I think they put up over 450 yards. So great performance from Georgia. And to me, it's like, that's what I was kind of expecting. Really all year, and we hadn't seen that. Last week, I told you that the anomaly was the quality play. And the norm for Georgia was the kind of like, what was that performances like we've seen against Kentucky and others. And what we saw against Tennessee was finally that ceiling, the top level. This is what they can be. That's definitely a team that can go win a national championship. And so then you look at Tennessee. Let me just quickly say this about Tennessee. I think Tennessee is a hell of a football team. I really do. They are a top echelon team. There's no doubt. But they are not a top level team. All right. And those two things are different. There are teams that can play great, and then there are teams that can win on the top level. And when I say win on the top level, I mean like you can win a national championship. And I just don't feel like that about Tennessee right now. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. Tennessee right now is maxing out what they can do because of the way that they kind of play offense. So I felt this way about this offense for a long time. And it's a really hard opinion to give because it's an insanely productive offense. And it's an offense that can, at times, look like the best offense in college football. But this offense that they use, and really it has its origins back at Baylor under Art Briles, and it's this spread, high pressure, downfield choice route, like passing game. And it's so spread out that you've got run game issues for the defense. And if you can run the football, now they have to make a decision. Are they defending the run or are they defending the pass? And you've got these wide receiver splits that are way outside of the numbers. And here's what it's predicated on: space and athletes. That's what it is. It's forcing you into a position that you're uncomfortable in as a defense, because if you're using that offense, you're banking on the fact that the guys that you have with the ball are better than the athletes that are trying to tackle them. And so you're putting that situation in space where there's a microscope on it or a spotlight on it, okay, where one win for you creates even a bigger win because of the space there. All right, so that's well and good until the other athletes are just as good as you. And this is what would happen to Baylor back in the day, and this is now what happens to Tennessee. This offense has a ceiling, and you can tell me it can be the number one offense in college football. That's fine, as long as your athletes are better than the opposition, because when the talent is equated, and this is what it means to be on the top level, is to win matchup games, okay? So this is how I define matchup games, is that you've got the same amount of talent on your roster as they do on theirs. Who wins a matchup game? You see, you can't employ systems that bank on the fact that you're going to have better players than your opposition. You just can't do that. You can't win matchup games like that. Can you win here or there and you get them in your environment and can it? Yes. But can it sustain itself to a championship? Probably not. Probably not. Because someone's going to figure you out. And if you don't have a secondary pitch, if you don't have a secondary option as an offense, then you're going to get shut down. And that's what we see from Tennessee. Look at this year. In the games in which they have a clear athlete advantage, they're scoring a lot of points. And in the games that you would consider their athletic advantage minimized, they don't. They don't. And the reason is because there's not a second pitch. Like, where do you go when the athletes in space philosophy isn't working? You see, you've got to have an answer. So if you look at the other great teams in the country, I think that they have an answer. Ohio State has an answer. They can throw it. They can run it. They can get big. They can get small. They can do a lot of different things. I think Georgia's probably the same way, as long as their wide receivers are playing well. Texas can do this. Alabama can do this. Oregon can do this. They've got options. You take something away from them, even if it's their bread and butter, they've got an answer. We can go do something else. And I don't feel like that about Tennessee. So that's why, for me, I'm really concerned about Tennessee at the top level. Is this a national championship caliber team? I do not think it is. And it's for that reason. That doesn't mean that they can't be really good. And it doesn't mean that they can't win games that are matchup games, and in particular in their home stadium. But it's not sustainable, because at some point, you don't have your fastball. And if you don't have a secondary pitch, then you don't get outs, to continue the baseball analogy. So in the SEC now, this is what I love about the SEC, is that we do have an expanded playoff. I believe that the top 5 or 6 teams, all of them could potentially win a national championship, because any of them can beat any of them on any given day. Now, save for maybe Tennessee and A&M, because of what I already said for Tennessee, and A&M I don't think is quite on the level of those upper tier teams. But if you talk about those top level teams, any of them can beat any of them, and they have. And they have. Outside of Georgia beating Texas in Austin, nobody wins on the road. And so a lot of it is environment based and game location based. So let's do this. Let's separate Texas, because they only have 1 loss. And let's take a look at the 2 loss teams in the SEC, and let's try to rank them. And it's going to give you a little bit of an insight into why I ranked my top 10 the way that I did. So let's first take a look at my top 10. In my top 10, I kept Oregon up there, even though they were sluggish against Wisconsin, but got the win, and more on that in a little bit, by the way. And I think I'm going to blow you away with a little bit of a stat about Oregon's season. I still have got Ohio State up there. I've got Texas up there. Indiana is still undefeated, and I think that they're better than people realize. Same with Penn State. So I'm in line with the committee and the AP up there, and then you've got to rank these SEC teams. I think that they're all better than Notre Dame. So I put Notre Dame at 10, and then you've got to parse out all the 2-loss SEC teams. You've got Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Tennessee, and they've all kind of beat each other. So you've got to have some way to differentiate one from the other. You can't just use head-to-head because then you just go in a circle. So what did I use? Here's what I used. I said, who are you at your best? Let's take everybody's ceiling and let's rate the ceilings and then place them in my rankings based on their ceiling. Well, then it starts to be a lot more clear because Georgia at their best is better than all of these teams. Because Georgia at their best can go and beat Texas on the road. None of the other teams have won on the road really with any substance over another great team. So that went on the road. They handled Tennessee in that game at home. And remember, they've just had to play more of these than everybody else. Their schedule is the only reason they're 8-2. If you were to swap schedules with Texas, they're absolutely at minimum a one-loss team. I truly believe that. They've played 4 games against the top 6 teams in the SEC, 3 of them on the road. So the schedule has been very difficult. So at their best, their ceiling, I put Georgia up there at the top. Then I went with Ole Miss because they're the only team that thoroughly dominated Georgia for really an entire game. Maybe it was weather related, whatever it was. Maybe it was environment related. They played great in that game. So at their best, Ole Miss is right behind Georgia. Behind Ole Miss at their best is Alabama. Alabama was great for a half against the Bulldogs. They were tremendous on the road against LSU, although that win on the road in Baton Rouge is starting to lose its luster just a little bit with the way that LSU's season is going down the tank. Next, I put Tennessee in there, and it's because their win over Alabama was really their ceiling, and it was at home by 1 score. So everybody else's ceiling is just a little bit above Tennessee, and A&M isn't really in that equation because, well, let's face it, a loss at South Carolina where they were totally dominated, and their best win was a comeback win over LSU, which has fallen off the map. So A&M doesn't really get into this discussion in the top 10. They fall just outside of that. 1, they lost to Notre Dame, which is in the top 10. And then these other 4, their ceiling is a lot better or a lot higher. And that's how I landed on that rank. And a lot of people are like, how can you have Ole Miss right behind Georgia after we just saw Ole Miss beat Georgia? Fair. That's totally fair. And yeah, I know Alabama beat Georgia as well. But guess what? Georgia then beat Tennessee, which beat Alabama. You can go around and around and around. And I just went to ceilings. I went to their high end and I said, who do I think is best? That's how I found or fell on that ranking. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. And you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.